All right, welcome back, Master Gardener newbies and trainees, interns, whatever you wish to call yourself. Uh, I just call myself Jim most of the time. We are going to finish up cold protection. This is some freeze damage symptoms from the least severe to the most severe. You'll notice this is on citrus. This is what I had the best photo set of. And are they the best photographs out there? No, they're not the best photographs. I haven't taken a lot of photographs of dead frozen plants. But if you have pictures of dead frozen plants that you'd rather see in future iterations of the online module, send them to me so I can incorporate it so some other future newbie will have much better photographs than you've had to endure today. So here is a citrus leaf on the underside, obviously, and we can see there are various water-soaked areas, mostly around the midrib. Now it may be just isolated to along the midrib and some other parts of the leaf, and here you can see some splotches as well, or maybe the whole entire leaf that looks water-soaked. I also call this the cooked spinach effect. What has happened is the cells what happened, the water inside the cells expanded. It burst open the cell wall, and as a result, the contents of the cell starts oozing out. Very much similar to when you cook, uh, vegetation. The cells break and then they get water soaked or that darker color. Now, this isn't the end of the world, although people do start to panic on their various tropical plants and subtropical plants, such as citrus. But again, generally, it's only relegated to some leaf damage. Whether that leaf will recover or eventually fall off will have to remain to be seen. A lot of people panic. Best thing to do is just remain calm. Now, this is citrus, but it can happen in some other plants where cold damage may cause them to abort fruit or not ripen the fruit properly because it was damaged by the cold. Sometimes you'll see this in peaches where they abort or now the fruit will just shrivel up and turn into a mummy. In citrus, frozen fruit is usually dry, hollow, or puffy or squishy. Again, think of citrus inside. It has all those juice sacs. And those juice sacs rupture, they leak out the contents of the juice, and then the fruit will dry out. In peaches, just using that as an example, the fruit is so cold sensitive that it just causes the cells to rupture, eventually immediately starting to dehydrate and turn into prunes or mummies or whatever you wish to call that. Here's where people really start to panic on various plants. This is citrus, but it can also happen on other cold sensitive tropical or subtropical plants. Is when the plant all of a sudden, about a week or 2 weeks later, drops most or all its foliage. Now, if we go back to our botany module, and you remember that, don't you? I talked about plants having hormones, and they know how to use them. Do you remember that? Hmm. Well, they do. Thought you would remember better than that, but let me go back to that. So, plants have various hormones. One is called abscisic acid. I don't expect you to remember the exact name of the acid or hormone, but again, you should understand the principle. Abscisic acid is something that tells the plant to abscise or lose leaves. It's a controlled process. The hormone is produced in one part of the plant and has to move to what is the abscission layer, the area where the leaf would fall off naturally from the plant. Kind of like leaves fall off of trees further north for the wintertime. So the plant got the signal something wasn't right, dropped the leaves, and as a result, abscisic acid was produced in great abundance and causes citrus tree to control, in a controlled manner, drop all its leaves. Now, is this a good symptom or sign? No, it's not the greatest one, but it still tells me that those branches were able to move because the conductive tissue wasn't totally damaged, move the hormone around the plant and cause the leaves to all drop. Now, will these trees recover completely? Again, time will tell, but these trees probably have a good chance of coming back if you don't start to rush it with things. Now, brown leaves holding on to the plant. This is one of the worst pictures of that I've seen. So send me a better one if you have it, whether it's citrus or what. But think of hibiscus. You probably have had hibiscus after a cold night. All of a sudden, a couple days later, it's clinging on to brown leaves. Any plant that should have green leaves during its growing season and they're clinging on is a bad sign. That tells me that that part of the plant had a rapid collapse of the xylem, the water conducting tissue. And as a result, the plant wasn't able to move the hormones around to shed leaves in a controlled manner. It froze quickly. Now, as you can see in this really poor photograph that I have of citrus, that parts of the tree has brown leaves clinging onto the smaller twigs. The remainder of the larger parts of the limb look fairly unaffected. But what do most people start doing to these plants? They start whacking them back. Now, if it's winter time, what have you told the plant to do? That's right, grow. So now you're telling the plant grow at a time when we're likely to still potentially have more frost or freezes. So again, be patient. Also, sometimes it may take a while for some of these symptoms to show up on your plants from the cold damage. Now, this is citrus, but I have seen it on some other more tropical flowering trees, some tropical fruit-producing trees like avocado, etc. And you see where the branches or on the right-hand side have cankers, not to be confused with the disease called canker, just it's a sore, if you will. Or I have seen it like on the left-hand side where the branches will split. What happens is the water that was in the conductive tissue, the xylem, froze, and when the plant starts to regrow, usually in spring, it'll split along that area. Now, this indicates some severe damage if it's on those larger limbs, as you can see on the right-hand photograph. Versus the left-hand side, you can probably prune out those areas with the clippers after the chance of frost has passed. Typically speaking, our last frost is when? Mid-March. That's correct. So I usually don't recommend pruning these till about the early part of April. Now this is a very bad sign or symptom on any plant, whether it's citrus or not. If it has had cold damage and it extends all the way to the trunk of the plant, tree in this case, again, a lot of people want to do something. They want to get out pruning paint. Is that going to help? No. They want to put something else on there. No. Spraying it with fungicide, would that help? Um, there's some theory that if you do it right after a cold event, it might, but again, that damage is large. It's all the way to the ground. This is a huge wound. The chances of that sealing properly without secondary infection occurring are about zero. So what is the best pruning technique for a plant like this? It's to use your shovel. It's called shovel pruning, or dig it up and replant, or don't plant with cold sensitive plants in your landscape if it's something else. Tips on freeze aftercare. Guys usually like this when I get to say it on various media like television and radio or print. Take a wait and see approach. Relax, remain calm. It'll may be okay. Oftentimes the best action is to do nothing. For example, a lot of people want to rush the recovery with additional water or start fertilizing. Usually these plants that have been damaged don't need extra water. If anything, they probably need a little less. As far as fertilizer, fertilizing in the winter when we may still be getting more cold will just tell the plant try to grow, which is the opposite of what we want it to do when there's potential for frost and freeze still. We want it to be as hardened off as possible. So do not try to help these plants along with extra water or fertilizer. Usually both compound the problem. Also, the more woody a plant is in nature, the longer you want to take this wait and see approach. Good example are trees or shrubs. Hibiscus, I'll use that as an example. Well, that's pretty woody. Not as woody as a citrus tree, but it's woody. I would wait till the spring to see how far I may have to cut it back. Usually I will know by about April that half of it froze out, or maybe it needs to be cut back all the way to the ground. On a tree, like a citrus, for example, or maybe an avocado, I may not find out till about March, April, maybe even May or June when it starts to flush out some new growth. Then all of a sudden I see a whole bunch of splitting of the major limbs, or worse yet, the trunk. Rather than having pruned it twice, I know if it's had that kind of damage, it may be best to be cut down. Now, there's a few exceptions to this rule if you have non-woody plants or herbaceous plants. Let's say you have some petunias or something out in the landscape and they get nipped by the cold. You want to cut away the frozen tissue shortly after the freeze event. That way you'll prevent any of the microorganisms that are breaking down the frozen tissue from getting into the unaffected, unfrozen tissue and causing disease issues. Another example would be like a banana, parenthetically a tree. It's herbaceous, it's not a woody plant. So if you have leaves that freeze, or even the trunk that freezes in part, and you'll see the trunk sometimes only freezes down a few feet from the top, you can cut that out into the unaffected tissue and it'll be all right. It's amazing how bananas might very well recover having half their trunk cut back. They're pretty tough things. But again, if you leave that rotting vegetation on herbaceous plants, you can get other diseases on your plants that you wish to keep. How bad is the damage? You may be surprised. You may have to cut things off at the ground. Don't pull it out. Just cut them off. A good example in that 2010 freeze, I had hibiscus, and I had a pink one and kind of a reddish one. And for 2 years, the pink one, I didn't see anything of it, and all of a sudden, late one summer, all of a sudden it decided to come back from the root system after 2 years of doing nothing. Had I dug it up, I wouldn't have that pink hibiscus back. So I was pretty happy and quite frankly, darn right surprised that that thing was able to cling on for 2 years. But usually that's a far extreme example. But again, give it time. Also, the high-tech way to tell if a plant tissue is frozen or alive is to use what we call the fingernail scraping test. Yeah, it's real high tech. You need a fingernail. Doesn't have to be quite as long, but that makes it a little easier. And you scrape a little bit of the bark, or nick the bark. You may have heard that expression. And what you're doing is you're scraping, and if it's green underneath there, which in this photograph it is not, you know it would be alive if it were green. In this case, because it's brown underneath that bark, you know that part of the plant is dead. You may have to take this down halfway past the photograph. You may have to take that particular limb down to the ground depending on the plant. If it's a grafted plant, the scion has to be remain intact and alive and healthy. Again, if it's below the graft, whether it's citrus or avocado or some other fruit-bearing tree, you only would have rootstock coming back. This is commonly how most people end up with a sour orange in their yard. They wonder what happened and how to make it sweet again. Well, they only have the rootstock coming up, which a lot of times was sour orange. Although with citrus greening being such a problem, that phone call is getting further and farther in between. Palm, the crown must survive, or the heart would be a better way. In these cold sensitive palms, sometimes the fronds will freeze and the heart can be all right. In 2010, we saw an awful lot of queen palms with the tops just burned very badly or frozen very badly, but a surprising number of them did survive. So sometimes that happens. We also saw a few years later on some of those queen palms that the outer part of the palm, although it's plumbed differently than a dicot, had a lot of damage to the vascular tissue underneath the bark. But because it's not arranged in a ring, but more like pepperoni on a pizza, a lot of the outer bark started sloughing off, or pseudo bark. And as a result, all of a sudden those plants, their stability was undermined and started snapping off near the base or about halfway up the trunk. let's all hope we have a warm winter this year. I don't want to ever see that in my life here in Central Florida, but it can occasionally happen even this far south. Good luck, everybody.